Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Saturday afternoon. Lincoln Riley, the USC Trojans, they make for lack of better terms, a splash hire, bringing in Rob Ryan to take over the linebackers coach position heading into 2025. And this seems to be a little bit more of a polarizing hire than I thought it was. We hopped on immediately Saturday afternoon, gave some instant takeaways, if you will. I was fired up about it. At the very least, this is a name that is synonymous with defensive football at the NFL ranks. Now, there are a couple of question marks too about Rob Ryan and his impact on USC. I want to get into those question marks and really just kind of split this into a few different talking points in terms of pros and cons of Rob Ryan. But I want to contextualize it in terms of, hey, what's the overall impact that he's going to have on this USC defense? Now, before we get into it, as always, the USC fans, a lot of which have been rocking with the boys for a very long time, whether you agree with some of these takes, whether you disagree, let it fly in the comment section. That's kind of the beauty of having these different conversations. We ain't all going to see it the same way. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start with by far, my favorite aspect about this hire, and that is the NFL background. Now, why am I so intrigued by the extensive NFL background that Rob Ryan has? It's because as of recently, the last 4 to 5 years in the college football landscape, you look at NFL coaches on the defensive side of the football that come down to the collegiate level, they are just having so much success. The last 3 defensive coordinators for Michigan were all from the NFL. All 3 of them have had a ton of success with Michigan the last couple of years. You look at Coach Lynn for USC and what he did at UCLA as well. NFL guy, comes down to the collegiate ranks, has a lot of success. Steve Belichick up at Washington, another really good example. Coaches that come from the NFL are normally having a lot of success at the collegiate ranks. That's where it starts for Rob Ryan. And I give Lincoln Riley a ton of credit in terms of recognizing this trend. It's an early trend. It's really only the last 5 years that we've seen this happen on the defensive side of the football. Well, look up in 2025. What does this USC defensive coaching staff look like? Dan Lynn, NFL guy. Rob Ryan, NFL guy. Coach Henney, NFL guy. I think Lincoln Riley is realizing this trend that he's seeing in college football and saying, hey, I want my defensive staff to be an NFL defensive staff. And that's exactly what you have heading into 2025. I think the second part about me liking the NFL background is he's rubbed elbows with some really, really good coaches. It goes all the way back to the early 2000s with Bill Belichick, and coaching guys like Willis McGahee and Teddy Bruschi, who is a legend at the linebacker spot. And then you go to the Ravens when he was coaching linebackers up there, working with guys like Patrick Queen. Rob Ryan, as a defensive coordinator, has kind of had a mixed bag of results. When you look at him as a pure linebackers coach, he's done a really dang good job. And that's one of the conversations you have to have is, look, Rob Ryan's not coming in and calling the plays. He's not taking over this defense. He's just coaching the linebackers. And a guy that has a strong background of coaching linebackers and developing linebackers at the high level, you can have, question marks about his defensive coordinator chops, because it certainly has been a mixed bag in the NFL. But as a pure linebackers coach, we've seen Rob Ryan do some really good things with a lot of different NFL linebackers. Now, number 2, and this is probably the biggest question mark that a lot of USC fans have, and rightfully so, recruiting. And how long will he stay at USC? Let's talk about recruiting first, because this is probably the biggest question mark that a lot of USC fans have. Hey, can Rob Ryan recruit? He hasn't coached college football since 1999 with Oklahoma State. I think that's a very fair question mark. Now, my first part about addressing this question mark is, look, in 2025, this modern era of college football, recruiting, it just looks a little bit different. It's much more transactional than relationship based. And that's just the pure, simple truth of where we are with college football. And so you look at recruiting and say, I don't necessarily know if it's going to have a huge impact on the recruiting trail. And then I think, secondly, Rob Ryan doesn't need to be the guy that is going out on the road. With the changes that we've seen in terms of what you're allowed to do on the recruiting trail, you're allowed to send your young assistants on the road to build those relationships with players. I think from a pure recruiting standpoint, and then it enters into the possibility of, hey, Rob Ryan might be a really good recruiter. He's got 2 Super Bowl rings on his fingers. He has extensive background in the NFL, and at the end of the day, what's so appealing to a guy like Coach Henne? Why has Coach Henne come in and really made some waves on the recruiting trail, not only on the high school trail, but also in the transfer portal with guys like Jah Jair and Keyshawn Silver? I think a lot of it has to do with his NFL background, specifically working with guys like Aaron Donald, where you're a young defensive lineman looking at, hey, who do you want to be coached by? A lot of these young defensive linemen grew up with pictures of Aaron Donald on their wall. How can you pass up going getting coached by a guy that played a significant role in developing Aaron Donald? I think you might get a similar impact with Rob Ryan, where a lot of these kids, yes, NIL certainly matters in these recruitments. The main goal is still the main goal. And that is go make it to the NFL. Going and playing for a guy that just spent his last 20 years coaching at the NFL level, a lot of which as a defensive coordinator, that might be a real weapon on the recruiting trail. Now, secondly, how long will he stay? I've seen some USC fans say, well, he's just coming for 1 year, going to collect the check, go back to the NFL. If your assistant coaches are not moving up, you're probably not hiring good coaches, right? That's where it starts. You don't necessarily want these coaches to be 1 year and done kind of guys, but you want to have your coaches move up in their coaching career, because then it becomes an attractive spot when you're going and hiring their replacement. You look at Nick Saban. Nick Saban rifled through coaching staff guys because a lot of times they come for 1 or 2 years and then go get a head coaching job. Well, then when Nick Saban's going out to hire the replacement, it becomes a very attractive job. And so you look at the linebackers coach, Matt Enns comes in, gets a head job at Fresno State. Rob Ryan comes in, maybe gives you a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then goes back to the NFL. You suddenly look at this USC defensive coaching positions and you're a guy that's maybe looking to move up and say, I wouldn't mind going to coach for USC because good things are happening. That is rarely becoming a concern for me. How long will coaches stay? Because you want your coaches that you bring in moving up in the ranks, because that means you made good hires. If you have a lot of coaches that are leaving for head coaching jobs, that's a good thing if you're USC. Because why was Nick Saban always able to hire just an elite staff around him? Because normally when you join Nick Saban's staff, good things happen to you in the future. Now, number 3, the Rob Ryan style. This is probably the most intriguing conversation. What does he bring to this USC defense? Doing some reading on Rob Ryan, I saw a quote from Mike Pettin, Cleveland Browns coach. This was 10 years ago. He goes, Rob Ryan's style of defense is, quote, not a read and react defense. He wants offenses to read and react to what we're doing. And so my biggest takeaway here is he wants to impose himself on opposing offenses. And I really do think you look at the best defenses in the landscape of college football, it's defenses that try to smother their opponents. And you look at one of the knocks on USC over the last couple of years, just not being disruptive enough, especially in terms of negative plays. Rob Ryan, he wants to, one, bring a lot of pressure. He's going to be coaching his linebacker to be playing downhill and aggressive. And then secondly, him and Coach Lynn are on the same page. This is a really important conversation to have. You want your defensive staff to see the sport the same way. You want continuity among the ranks. Coach Lynn knows Rob Ryan from his time at Baltimore. I promise you, Coach Lynn was banging the table for Rob Ryan ever since Matt Enns left to go to Fresno State. And so bringing in Rob Ryan, who probably sees he probably sees defense very similar to Coach Lynn. And I think that's important. And then lastly, player development. This is really big too. Rob Ryan's had a lot of success with a lot of different linebackers over his years, whether he's been a linebackers coach or a defensive coordinator. This is a big next couple of years for USC development at linebacker, because you got some trait C, high upside guys. We talked about it on Saturday. Mason Cobb, Easton Mascarenas Arnold, they were just so limited in terms of how good they could be because they weren't the best athletes, both kind of shorter, both kind of slower. You look at the linebackers going into 2025, guys like Eric Gentry, who that's by far the biggest storyline for me. What can Rob Ryan do with the development of Eric Gentry, who very well could be an All-American linebacker for USC in the 2025 year? Desmond Stevens. I view Desmond Stevens very similar in terms of a high upside linebacker that the sky's the limit for this kid. How about Matai Togiai coming in as a freshman? That's another guy that if you can maximize him, you're looking at an All-American caliber linebacker. There's a lot of raw clay in this linebacker room. Rob Ryan, a proven developer at the linebacker position. What is his impact? I think it could be pretty high. And so I look at Rob Ryan and say, yeah, look, there's a bunch of question marks that you could have, but there's also a lot of things to be excited about, most notably Lincoln Riley leaning into creating an NFL caliber staff on the defensive side of the football. And that's what it's looking like for USC. I'm fired up to see what Rob Ryan can bring. He's going to be really fun to listen to some interviews with as well. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.